I am going to hide my screen and go mute. Need anything from me? All right.
I
You
think
might
we
just
are.
want to remind people to be on mute unless they're speaking.
Yeah, it's a great reminder.
Marisol, did you plan on touching on the that chat that we saw in the SDL forum? Thought the one from Cal Anderson was particularly good about the challenges and realities that some firms are facing, or is that better for another topic?
It's a good question. I was going to keep it very, very high level, but that might be a good thing to bring into our third session, diving a little bit deeper into these and bringing in some of the challenges in embodied carbon as well.
Oh, sorry. I was referring to the one he mentioned about the how they're doing with matching 2030 commitment where they're supposed to be presently, because it was LMNS and they had just recently, for the first year actually hit the target.
I don't know if I think I saw that one, but I don't think I've gotten in deep enough to see that one.
Okay.
I think I just saw the comment on some of the other firms submitting their data for it and trying to hit some of their targets.
He had a little blog post on it. I might just drop into the chat after our portion. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. While you are joining and we're waiting to get started, if you want to add your first and last name into the chat, that'll help us record attendance and also make sure that you are getting AIA credit for this. If you signed up for the event with your AIA number, then you will be getting credit for that. But we'd also like to track attendance for this in the chat if you wouldn't mind typing that in there. Hi, Tony. How are you doing? All right, thank you all for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a very packed agenda today, 3 great projects that we're really excited to present to you all today, and some fantastic lineup of presenters today. This is our second session in the series, so if you missed our first session, we'll give a quick recap of the 2030 commitment, and today we're going to be focused on some projects that have been signed on to the 2030 commitment and their implementation towards reducing their energy goals, and then also some other sustainability features that each of the projects have been able to hit beyond just energy. We are able to provide one AIA continuing education unit HSW credit. So if you have signed up for this webinar with your AIA number, you will get that credit. If you didn't include that when you signed up, or you're not sure, include your full name and your number in the chat. And if you are here as a participant, we'd love to also have you put your first and last name in the chat so we can track attendance on this as well. Tiffany and I are the co-chairs of the Committee on the Environment, COTE Committee with AIA Colorado. We will be your moderators for today and walking you through the presentation. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today. We have Tom Hoopman with Form and Flow. We have Kevin Aronimus, principal at Shears Atkins Rockmore, SAR Plus Architects. Dan Craig is going to be joining him in his presentation as well, principal as well at Shears Atkins Rockmore Architects. Tony Thornton, principal architecture studio leader at Stantec, and Renee Azerbaiji with Mead and Hunt. She's a national decarbonization and sustainability leader. So we're going to get started with a quick overview of the 2030 commitment. AIA Architecture 2030 in 2006 started the 2030 Challenge, and AIA has developed the 2030 commitment to provide a framework for architects to sign on to the commitment and track their progress towards their 2030 goals. The commitment asks that all new buildings, developments, and major renovations meet this tiered energy reduction towards 2030. So here, 2010, it was looking at a 60% reduction. 5 years later, another 10% reduction, all the way to looking at a carbon neutral building from an energy specific perspective in 2030. They are compared to the US the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey, or CBEX, from 2003 is the baseline. And all projects are based on an EUI. They're tracking their EUI. It's an energy use intensity, and that's in kBTU per square foot per year. So projects are all evaluated per square foot to compare buildings of similar use type to one another. For the AIA 2030 commitment, they ask, let's see, I'll ask as everyone's signing on, if they wouldn't mind muting. So to start with the commitment, you will sign a commitment letter. Your firm is then asked to create a sustainability action plan detailing how you plan to apply the principles of the 2030 commitment, reaching this goal of zero operational carbon by 2030. You're then trying to implement this onto your projects and tracking that information in the DDX. It's an online platform they've created. And then every 3 years, review and update your sustainability action plan. The SAP Sustainability Action Plan is unique to every firm and is their roadmap for how to achieve this goal. There are several examples online, and several firms have so many resources that they've openly shared that you are able to download to put those together. So it discusses your company commitment, design and approach, goal setting and evaluation, governance and reporting, internal training and education. Let's see. Nick, I'm not sure if you're able to help with muting different participants.
Kind of working it on the back end, Marisol.
Perfect, thank you. And then kind of looking at operations as well. So what is your sustainability action plan also from internally with your firm and operations? You know, with the 2030 commitment, it might seem like a very daunting thing, especially now, 2024. In 2025, we're looking at a 90% reduction in energy use. But these are targets that we're asking firms to try to achieve. And really the big thing that we're looking for is for firms to submit their performance data. Trying to target these is the goal. If you're not able to get there, that is okay. There's no punishment for not meeting these goals, but the aim is for everyone to be aligned in this shared goal. It takes probably less time than you think. And there are so many different platforms and tools available to help upload that information and data online. And again, the DDX has been made available online as a platform to help upload all this information to track it. So we're going to dive into our first case study. It's the Denver Parks and Rec office. Tom Hoopman with Foreman Flow is going to be presenting this, so I'll hand that over to him. And we just have a quick snapshot here of the project team. Owner was City of Denver, architect Studio Completiva, mechanical engineer, the Ballard Group, electrical engineer, PK Electrical, sustainability and zero energy consultant, Foreman Flow, and the contractor was GH Phipps.
All right, well, great seeing so many familiar faces. Go ahead and keep sharing. I wasn't going to share my screen. You're going to just keep rolling through. Sorry.
Yep, got it. Sorry.
All right. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. Yeah. Okay. Go next slide. All right. So this is a new project just got completed this summer. It's a small project. It's a 5,000 square foot office. That's Smith Road in Havana. It's for the Denver Parks and Rec. It's a basic office program, including a large open office area, a few private offices, some locker rooms, conference room, and a large training room. Go next slide. This is for the City of Denver, obviously, and this project actually was a net zero energy pilot project for the City of Denver, and I have here on the slides Denver's goals and their definition of net zero that we were working through on this project. The next slide. Looking at the 2030 commitment and just kind of looking at the baseline and the target, just to kind of set the context here. The baseline EUI, as shown here, is 58.3, and the target being an 80% reduction is 11.66. So we'll talk about how we met it at the end. Next slide. So kind of walk through the building with you and some of the design strategies. I've got just a couple high-level slides first, and we'll dig into a handful of strategies. But the building really had an emphasis on passive design, and we kind of used the architecture as the kind of the first foundation for good low energy building. We were looking, like of course, high performance envelope and windows. We looked through all the details, really eliminating thermal bridges. We utilized perfect wall construction, really high quality air barrier, integrated thermal mass, a variety of passive strategies. And then next slide. On the active system front, one of the criteria was an all-electric building, and I'll talk. We evaluated a couple different options there. We ended up with a ground source heat pump system that I'll talk about in a minute, paired with a dedicated outside air system for fresh air. Of course, things like LED lighting, vacancy control for really good low energy lighting. Looking at low energy star appliances. We even had automatic receptacle control with occupancy sensors throughout the building, and a net metering system. And then a PV system that is still in progress with the city of owner that is ready to be mounted on the roof. Go to the next slide. So the first kind of big strategy, and it's one of the most important kind of first moves you make right in design, is just the building massing and the orientation. We had a pretty open site. It's a pretty industrial site, as you can tell, here at Smith and Havana. And it was very easy to get a very narrow building that's 40-foot wide and oriented with an east-west access. You can see the wind directions and the sun angles on this site diagram, just made for very easy, and that orientation just gave us a lot of benefits. So next slide. Looking at incident solar on the windows and looking at the summertime. So really this is sort of filtered for whenever the temperature outside was over 75 degrees and we might be looking for shading. And with very few windows on the west and the east, you could see most of them on the south and the north. And with the overhangs, we have a lot of good control for solar gain in the summer. And then the next slide. Testing and refining, the shades and the window proportions. also providing, you could see how the south windows have really bumped up significantly. We're getting some good winter gain when temperatures are below 55 outside. So again, the shading and the orientation, all this is doing really good work to control the sun, both in the winter and the summer. Go ahead to the next slide. And that is proved out a bit. This is just the open office, so one of the zones in the space. And this is like a heat map. So it's every hour of the year. And you can see the winter, we have that good gain in the daytime, right? And very little gain in the summer. So kind of quantifying what that looks like through the whole year as far as the solar control. So the next slide. And then that continues, of course, to the daylight with north and south windows and a pretty narrow floor plate and pretty wide open. We were, had a very high solar daylight autonomy, hitting 94% for the regularly occupied spaces. So very good daylit space, taking advantage of that with the daylight sensors. The next slide. And then the flip to that too is also, we have very minimal glare and gain. So the annual sunlight exposure was quite low at 6.7%. So very good performing from a daylight perspective. In the next slide. And then we also have operable windows. So, we initially looked at the Denver weather files and then just sort of screening for the hours, or the temperature and the number of hours that natural ventilation would be effective. And then modeled the building with and without natural ventilation with the HVAC system off. And you can see the hot and cold kind of diagrams for the year and how significant actually opening the windows. It doesn't help all the hours in the middle of the summer, but it really does a lot of work for a very simple strategy. Next slide. These are just the elevations. We have cross ventilation. Again, remember the floor plan is pretty open from the north and the south. And we have we sized operable windows from both sides to get good cross ventilation and try to meet some good kind of passive autonomy with just opening the windows. In the next slide. Then looking at the envelope and thermal control, this diagram, we kind of benchmarked just kind of the code minimum, the IECC, but then we also looked at how high we would go if we were to hit passive house. And we kind of iterated and looked for kind of a good sweet spot in that range. And you see the values that we kind of landed on for the roof, the exterior walls. I find it like R28 for exterior walls in this climate does a lot of really effective work at reducing the loads. It's fully insulated slab. And then the glazing, we had a nice pleasant surprise during construction. We actually needed to substitute the glazing manufacturer, and we were able to get a triple pane Alpine window package in for the same price. So we ended up hitting the passive house levels with the final window package level of a U 0.15 on average for the glazing system. And then we had infiltration goals. It's very important to set those as well and think about the air barrier. And we were kind of splitting the difference between passive house levels and code, targeting, hoping to get a 0.20 at a 75 Pascal lower door test, and the results came in a bit lower at 0.15. So some good successes there. The next slide. And just to see what the envelope did, this is heating demand before we applied the efficiencies of the heating system, a 42% reduction in just heating demand on the system just through the envelope. The next slide. And then also just peak loads. So we're looking at heating peak loads, a 33% reduction in peak heating loads on average across all the zones in the building. The next slide. And that brings us to the HVAC system. So we looked at 3 different all-electric options from a geothermal system to VRF and to a fan coil system with the air source heat pump. And they're all quite close. We did a kind of a criteria with their maintenance staff and others at the city, as well as the engineer, and kind of rank them. The preferred choice, after kind of the big discussion, looking at the energy costs or the energy kind of use and costs and all the different factors, we ended up selecting the geothermal system. The next slide. Got an image of the drilling rig out there and just a kind of a simple diagram. We got the bore field with a handful bores out in front of the building and supplying basically water to air heat pumps in each zone. So very simple system. All that's supplied by with ventilation air from the dedicated outside air system, the DOAS system that has heat recovery. All right, next slide. And that brings us then now to the renewables. So the renewables are scheduled to go in this year. Apparently the roof, after it got installed, this metal roof had some hail damage, and they're going through a insurance and warranty, or not warranty, but insurance kind of replacement issue. And then they'll get the PV installed hopefully before the end of the year. Targeting a system size of 32 kW. So you can see here's the layout kind of on that south sloping roof. It has a little extra area for a PV expansion, but we've also included a 15% PV contingency, knowing that year to year weather will be different. There may be differences in occupancy schedule and different uses, so it gives a little buffer on the net zero goal. And the trees are shown here because there's actually quite a bit of coordination with the landscape architect on making sure that, you know, we understand the height that the trees would grow to and making sure they weren't going to be shading the roof. And we were actually ended up having to kind of move around some of the trees and some of the landscaping to keep the roof shade free. So calculated the shading losses, but also the snow losses to kind of calculate the projected annual energy generation from the system. Okay, the next slide. And then we also installed an E-gauge energy submetering system. So a very easy system. It'll be accessible for you know, with others throughout the city, be able to monitor and see how the building's doing, which is an important part of a net zero energy project. And the next slide, to look at the final energy model for the design, at least like as designed model, hitting a EUI 26.5. You can see, you know, a big chunk of that is that plug load in the green. And if you remember that 11.6 is pretty close to what the 2030 target would be, right? And we have a pretty big server room. We had some loads we had accommodated in that plug load, but also, you know, it is a very low energy building. But when we go to the next slide, when we apply then the renewables, we look at the net zero energy balance. You know, this is just on a monthly basis. You know, we could see how the building consumes in the blue line, and then the summer versus the winter energy generation on the renewables. And we end up being, the next slide, we kind of just put those totals together. We have the EUI of 26.5, but on an annual basis, that's offset with about 30.7 kBtu per square foot of energy generation. So we get a slightly kind of a sort of a net positive, a negative 4.2 EUI compared to the AIA baseline of 11.7. So that's our simple office building project, the net zero energy pilot project for the city of Denver. We'll pass it on to the next case study.
It was fantastic. Well done. Congratulations on getting well below those targets and below net zero. Our next project is the University of Denver Burwell Center for Career Achievement. The owner for this project was the University of Denver. Design architect was Lake Flato, local architect, SAR Plus, MEP engineer, AEI, landscape architect, Didier Design Studio, structural engineer was KLNA, and the general contractor for this project was PCL. And I'm going to hand it over to, let's see, you can stop sharing. And there we go. I'll hand it over to Kevin and Dan to take it from here, present their project.
Great. Thanks, Marisol. Thanks, Tom. Good to see, as you said, so many old friends from early COTE days online, and nice to share some updates about what we're doing. We did want to share a little bit about this project that we did in partnership with Lake Flato, but full transparency, our involvement in this actually predated our signatory status to the 2030 challenge. So we can't measure exactly like how did this change. However, it's important to say that Lake Flato had been signatories beforehand. So as we did some of the early design work that Dan is going to talk about, that definitely influenced how the performance metrics of the building turned out. And certainly we were in the process of evolving that and evaluating 2030 as this came along. So it's one of these kind of best case scenarios of partnering with other architects. Sometimes is you learn a lot from each other and provide value both ways, which is kind of our goal when we enter these relationships together. So I think with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Dan. You had the most involvement with this, but thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks, Kevin, and everyone else for being here. It's such a great conversation. Tom, thanks for sharing. Super inspiring and instructive. And echoing a little bit of what Kevin said, this is a great experience for our office to be able to work with Lake Flato, who has done a number of really incredible and highly sustainable projects across the country. It's always great to work in our city and with the University of Denver. And yes, we learned a lot. I think Lake Flato would agree they learned a lot. And importantly, the students in the school, faculty, the entire university has voiced how much and appreciation for how much they gained from this experiences as well, which we'll kind of get into here in the next slide. You can see there were a number of sort of goals and fairly aspirational that we started this project with, like a little bit of condensed history. The leadership at the school had kind of reinvigorated their commitment to sustainability when this project was begun, but they didn't necessarily have a good sense of what that meant for them. They just wanted to be more sustainable than they had in the past, right? And so they'd sort of set some goals for carbon neutrality by 2050, and they had some benchmarks along the way. 2020 is when this project opened, and doesn't really need to reminding of all the different kind of things that were going on in our world at that time. So there was a lot in flux, but what we think is like a really great measure of success for this project and for the university is that on the heels of it, seeing the success of the Burwell Center, which you'll see here in the next few slides, they kind of saw the light. They understood how these projects can come to be, how the campus can build a series of buildings or kind of an ecosystem of buildings together and work with their students and faculty to become net zero. And they have doubled down on that commitment. Just this last year, they changed their goal for carbon neutrality of 2050 to 2030. And they have a plan for how they're going to do that. And this project was one of the sort of benchmarks for them along the way. So how did we get there? For those who aren't familiar with the University of Denver, this is just kind of a quick snapshot of the main quad at the university over here on the right, and then kind of an enlarged illustrative plan that the landscape architect created of the Burwell Center. And I think it's important to note that programmatically, this building endeavors to connect students with community members. It's one of the unique qualities of the building that it seeks to create spaces that are comfortable and welcoming and inviting for lots of different folks. They like to say it's the first place you go when you're on campus as a prospective student. It might be the last place you go when you graduate, and ideally you come back after that and you kind of give back to the community. So that's the purpose of this building. When we began the project without engaging the faculty yet, we were told this should be a Class B building. It should be LEED Silver at the least. They had never installed renewables on their projects, and they had sort of a budget, but they didn't quite know what that looked like, right? And as we went through a series of workshops, we developed sort of more aspirational goals that were led by the students, and that really kind of gave everyone, the team certainly got a lot of inspiration from that, but the university was able to kind of get behind ideas for why not try for a net zero building? Why not be the first LEED Platinum building on campus? And some other goals that came out of that were developing a structural system that is as sort of carbon sensitive as possible, that illustrates the university's commitment to sustainability. And let's use renewable energy not just as a way to create or to reduce the energy load of the building, but let's put that on display and sort of start to sort of forecast to a larger community. Again, the objective of this building to reach out to a larger community. We'd like it to illustrate the university's commitment to a more sustainable future. And so kind of cutting to the chase, the building became the first mass timber building on campus, and they're now pursuing additional projects that gave them some trepidation to begin with, but they really love the end result. There is a 7 kilowatt roof array of photovoltaics that is the largest one that they have on campus. And then last but not least, it did achieve LEED Platinum status and is the first, and that becomes now the sort of benchmark for all the future buildings. How do we get there? As I mentioned early on, before any lines were drawn, and after just sort of having baseline university requirements of things like LEED Silver certification, we engage the students and the faculty through 3 different workshops to get their sort of goals and aspirations on paper, on record, and allowed those to guide the process moving forward. And out of those, as I said, energy reductions, use of mass timber, and using renewable systems were primary goals for the students. I think folks on this call probably have seen this many times, but for the students, it was really helpful for them to see why mass timber or why reduce carbon. Why are we even talking about that as architects? And using the structural system as a way to capture carbon as opposed to consume it is really kind of it's just such an interesting and transformative idea in our world, and that resonated with the students. Other ideas that were explored, you can see, kind of the whole list of questions that we asked the students, and the ones in green are the ones that kind of became part of the project. And I think one of the ways that we were able to achieve that, the levels of success in the project that we'll go through in a little bit more detail here next, was in having, as you see here, kind of a holistic approach to sustainability. Those workshops started with asking the students, what does sustainability mean to them? And it does get into things like reducing the carbon through the structural system, and natural air and water use reduction, and the importance of efficient mechanical systems. Those are all crucial components. But again, for them, they wanted a more sustainable world. They wanted this building to set a kind of a new bar for the university and pave the way for future projects. And they wanted all of that to be on display as much as possible. So you can kind of see here in this diagram, the rooftop PVs actually are part of what helped this building take on some of the traditional University of Denver architecture, but in a much more kind of environmentally sensitive way. In past projects, they use copper roofs, gable roofs, right, to shed water. This uses photovoltaics to create energy. That's just one example. And we'll go into these systems in a little bit more detail. The all mass timber is notable about this project in that it's not just the columns and the beams and the decking, but it's also the lateral systems. And so the stair and elevator cores are actually this 5-ply CLT system, and it's the tallest of its kind in Colorado. So everything above the foundation is wood, and that has some code and structural engineering challenges associated with it, but what it results in, you'll see at the end here, are some really interesting and kind of beautiful and warm stair spaces that are encouraging folks to use the stairs much more often than the elevator, for example. Similar, I think, to how Tom described their process as a kind of a traditional office building, though it's a little bit non-traditional. We were able to explain, or explore, I should say, ways of reducing the footprint of office spaces by reducing private offices. Shared office spaces consume less space. They also use mechanical systems much more efficiently. However, in order to do that and be comfortable, you kind of want to have the people who are in the office from 9 to 5, that they might sit a little bit more inboard and away from the windows that can be either cold or hot in the morning or afternoon. And on the southward, it's a little bit more moderate, but still, kind of, I guess I would say, like, very bright and very warm. Those are great breakout spaces, maybe less so for, very focused task work, which is more inboard, right? So that kind of thinking and description to them helped them, the faculty who are in this building, who were all in individual office spaces, move into a shared space. So there's not one single private office in this building. And that was really kind of a fundamental shift for them, and it helped us reduce our energy loads. As I kind of alluded to in the diagram, use of renewables was a priority. The de-architecture is a thing in and of itself. And for those who've worked on the campus architect, who's been there for 35 years now, is very committed to kind of continuing to maintain and strengthen the campus architecture, but was also very open to doing it in a kind of a new and maybe more modern way. And so you can see here one of the photos of how a traditional gable structure and brick building can also embrace some other kind of archetypes that start to illustrate the sustainability objectives. Similar to the private office conversation, this project was a great opportunity to talk about how task lighting and plug load management and how those little space heaters and those little refrigerators take a lot of energy. And all the faculty sign an agreement, or I should say the staff who work in this building, to not have those at their spaces. And we all committed to creating comfortable environments for them that allow them not to have space heaters. But that also was a big step for them, right? And it's a great educational opportunity where everyone gets to learn how much energy do those things use and how can we work differently so that we don't consume a lot of energy. Wear a sweater on a cold day, right? And this is a pretty casual environment. So I've seen people wearing flip-flops and shorts in the summertime. You know, it's pretty wonderful to see how they've learned through this project. The systems, as you can see, kind of given a number of aspects that it was endeavoring to be an all-electric building, and it is that. It became the first also all-electric building at DU. Utilizes an IDEC system coupled with VRFs, and those, certainly provide a very efficient mechanical system. And the indoor-outdoor air quality is also very notably good and notably importantly good during the COVID, when this building switched from being an office building to the best classroom building that the university had, because it had the highest performing mechanical systems and it also had operable windows. So interesting how, like a conversation that started with energy use reductions ended up creating a more resilient building and more flexible for uses none of us could have projected. As I think all of us probably do, we were tracking the various components of the LEED certification throughout the project. And Platinum was very aspirational in the beginning. There were quite a few stretch goals in here. As you can see, we got it over the finish line. And, some of the innovative aspects of the project, like, as you'll see, using mass timber for the stair and elevator cores were kind of helpful in us achieving that certification. But again, it wasn't, I think for us and for all of us on this call, I think we'd probably agree the checklist and the credits weren't nearly as impactful as the reduced carbon impact and the sort of educational opportunity of using timber to create a stair. It's really wonderful. Here is how kind of the breakdown of how the baseline energy versus the design energy shook out, and how we were able to achieve kind of a pretty low design EUI of about 34. And as the building has operated over the past 3 or 4 years, it actually is operating at an EUI of closer to 17, which is kind of incredible. And the rooftop PVs, which we assumed therefore were going to provide about 30 or 40% of the electricity, are actually providing 75% of the electricity. So I'll share in a couple slides here, maybe the details of how or why it wasn't designed as a net zero energy building. But again, this kind of got you to realize, hey, we can actually do this. And next time we're going to stretch even further. Here you can see, again, back to the healthy building. This is one of the spaces that was intended to be a career fair space, kind of an event space for the career achievement building. And you probably all recognize these single chairs at tables spaced very specifically apart in here. This is the largest and most successful classroom on the campus during the COVID, again, because it had operable windows, great mechanical systems, and it was designed to have remote learning opportunities. So it had good microphones, good cameras, good AVIT throughout this room. And it wasn't intended to be a classroom, but it performed that need for a couple of years. And just a few finished photos. You can see one of the stair cores and the daylight, the warmth of the wood. So that's it. Thank you. That's our case study. And I guess we'll popcorn to the next person. Thank you, Marisol.
Thank you. That is It's so fantastic to see and also hear the presentation from an architect's perspective as well. I know there have been a few presentations of this project from the contractor and the engineers, and hearing from the architect and the work that you did with the campus and the students as well provides just a great background that is exciting to hear. So our next case study is the Denver Water Administration Building, excuse me. Has quite a hefty project team. Denver Water was our owner. Architect was Stantec. Owner, architect, interiors, lighting, landscape, and sustainability, Stantec and RNL Design. Design MEP was Integral Group. MEP of record is IMEG. Mead and Hunt, Ambient Energy, did the energy, sustainability, and commissioning. Civil engineering through Martin and Martin. Structural was KLNA. Form and Flow helped with early concept sustainability. One Water was with Aqua Nova, and the contractor was Mortensen. This project has sustainability goals beyond energy. We're excited to hear about those. So I will pass it over to Renee and Tony for this presentation.
Great. Thank you, Marisol. Renee, you're on mute still? There you are. And here it comes. Okay. We're planning on tag teaming this a little bit. I've got the first few slides up front, but I don't know, Renee, if you wanted to say anything leading into it, feel free, and then we'll pick you up partway through.
Sounds good. Go ahead, Tony. Can you see the
Okay.
screen?
Yes, we can. So first of all, yes, big team. Thank you for having us here to present on the project. It was definitely a rewarding experience, and again, good to be in a room full of friends. Many of you have had at least a passing. Some of you have had even a greater than passing participation on this project. Tom, you'll even recognize a chart or two that comes up in here. So when it does, pat yourself on the back for being a part of this team. So Denver Water, the campus is a 36-acre campus. It has multiple buildings, 11 in total, 9 of those that we touched. The big focus around sustainability and energy performance is the admin building, which is 176,000 square foot. It's a high LEED platinum scoring building. It's net zero energy, and then it has a one water concept, which is a water reuse and smart water use concept that we'll talk about more in depth as we go into it. So next slide. Yeah. So we want to maybe also talk about the journey here. There are details on how the project works as we get through, and discussions on energy performance, but wanted to talk a little bit about just how did it come to be? Why is it here? What's important about the formation of what this campus is and what this building became. So Denver Water was looking to update its campus. It was many decades old for most of its buildings. Some of its buildings were stretching into the 100 years old, although we did keep the really historic ones. And they knew they needed some modernization. They weren't working efficiently as a team anymore, and it was impacting their service to the ratepayers. So one of the things that we did immediately was help them decide that they really do want to stay here on campus, that we could achieve their parking needs, that we could site them in a campus that has historic significance, that we could in fact shorten the time of construction with this project if we stayed here and we were smart about logistics on the campus. It's a great location. It's located between numerous areas of change, including La Loma and their area, higher education area. But it's really important, we thought, to help them stay here for a long term. Next slide. And for those of you that have been around for a while, you might remember this. This was Denver Water circa 2015 and before. This was their old building smack dab in the middle of campus where no one could find it if you were driving around for a while, getting a little lost. Here it is. It was a 1970s building and not doing very much for either the employees on the inside, where it was a bit maze-like in certain areas, and certainly not on the energy side. We could go to the next. So a bit of a transformation. Here we go. This is the campus as it exists today. The building is now moved to have a street front and a presence, an urban edge presence, so you can find it, and it becomes a part of the fabric of the urban context there, while at the same time sort of blending in the background the operations buildings that still make up a lot of what they do here. Quick fun fact is that old rectangular building, when we look at this new campus, the energy that we've been getting, the performance values on this entire new campus performs better than their old admin building did by itself. So next slide. All right, so we're going to kind of focus on the quad here. Again, if we were looking to the right, which is south on the project, that would be the operations area. To the north here is the admin building in its squiggle shape. We've got the parking garage at the top of the screen, and then we've got some covered parking out down below. Each of those areas are important for the PV area that we'll talk about later. But this whole area is a mixed plan, integrating a bunch of natural and low water techniques along with energy efficiency considerations and area for photovoltaics. One of the things that both of the projects mentioned previously is orientation of the building. So even though the diagram is turned here, the long skinny building oriented to take advantage of the solar sun was key to its performance, both in terms of getting the solar access to the PVs, but also in terms of its natural daylighting strategy as well. So, next. So I talked a little bit about the importance of being where they are and staying with at the heart of Denver, where they've been for a while. And part of that was to develop a 50-year strategy around their new campus, understanding that the advanced things that they wanted to do, the stretch goals that Denver Water wanted to hit, and many of these they didn't know they wanted to hit until we sat down and worked through those with them in a series of charrettes and meetings. But ultimately what they wanted to hit was a series of aggressive stretch goals. And that really meant being in place for a while. We needed to build a building that's going to be here and operate, so that as you look out and cast the forecast forward on how it's operating, how its energy costs are paying back, that over time you're paying for all of these advancements through the savings. And so it became really responsible for the ratepayers. So a few of those things, and we'll talk about these more as we get in, but the structural system was a believe it or not, a post-tension concrete with a radiant system in there. There's a high performance envelope we'll talk about. There is an exposed structure, all very purposeful for maximizing the sort of longevity of the building and achieving its ultimate payoff.
Good afternoon. I'm Renee Azerbege with Mead & Hunt again. Our team was involved in the Denver Water Project from early design through construction. We did energy modeling, Excel energy design assistance, commissioning of all the buildings, including the central plant, and then LEED campus certification and LEED certification for all the different buildings. And over a 50-year, so Tony was just talking about the 50-year look. So looking at existing energy costs over 50 years, that adds up to about $46 million. When you include the energy savings from a LEED certified or a gold or platinum building versus net zero, you're saving quite a bit over time. And when you have a client who is a long-term building owner, who understands they might still have these buildings after 50 years, it's good to have that dialogue, but you're probably wondering about, well, what about construction costs? So when you add that in, the budget was originally about 123 million. You add those energy costs to it, typical business as usual, the top part versus the photovoltaics at the bottom, plus upgrades. These efficiency gains are not for free. So still the total life cycle impact over 50 years is lower than business as usual. Also, what helps is when you have a CEO and a board who's really interested in this topic, and they were very supportive of these goals that we pursued for the project. We start out with early energy use intensity benchmarks to identify what should the goal be based on buildings of the same type. This is energy usage per square foot for the year. And so there were targets established in the concept design phase that you'll look at the 35. We ended up getting that much lower after design progressed, and we'll tell you a little bit why. And for this
includes the cafeteria inside that 35.
Yeah, right. That's true. It does. So we got down to about the same numbers that Tom just presented, about 27. But we'll get into the details in a little bit. For net zero for solar, we ended up, Denver Water said, they don't really want to do net zero for the whole campus. They wanted to focus it on the admin building. So to get the admin building net zero, we needed the roof for the admin, the roof of the employee parking garage, as well as it ended up not here, but over here in the visitor parking lot, which is really nice because people come in and they're under solar powered parking, which is kind of a good educational component. Now, Tony's going to talk a little bit more about the strategies.
Yeah, and I realized I never introduced myself. So Tony Thornton from Stantec. Talking about the strategies here, there's a number of things at play. I've hinted at a few of them, and many will look familiar having gone through the previous presentations, but there's still a few interesting things to talk about in here. I did mention that the building was a post-tension concrete with a radiant heating and cooling system included. There are two reasons for doing that. One, it brought down the overall height of the building. We could stay out of high-rise classification, which helped us on our overall cost, but it also provided super efficient heating and cooling coming in the downward direction from the ceiling above. We then are providing fresh air from the raised floor system below. A number of the other features include a triple pane window system across the way. We did look at heat mirror, but ultimately landed on triple pane. We've got solar shading that allows sun to be blocked at the wrong times and enter at the right times to make sure that our daylighting is reaching and penetrating all the way through the 65-foot wide floor plate. And then, of course, there are a lot of internal features like LED lighting, workstations that have power controls. I heard also mentioned on the last project about a grand stair. We have our own irresistible stair in this project that encourages use of it rather than the elevators, and it seems to be working quite well for them. Let's keep going. Yeah, I'll hit the building skin on the next one. So did talk a little bit about this, and you can see the radiant floor slabs here, or at least cutaway diagram. I forget, I was going to look up the number of miles of tubing that we have in this building, but it's crazy. But ultimately, it's part of a holistic system. We do have, I mentioned the super insulated walls. It's a metal panel system where I see our numbers don't quite add up there. It's supposed to be R34 walls and R40 roof. There's a steel frame behind it. The panels themselves are interlocking insulated metal panels. The window to wall ratio is around 47%. With some extra windows in some key spaces that we needed to highlight. And then I mentioned earlier that we had a dedicated outdoor air system that happens through underfloor air distribution.
So for the Xcel Energy EDA program, the project earned $230,000 in rebates. And when we look at energy measures and improvements, there were some value engineering options we looked at to see if it made much of a difference. But we also looked at the central utility plant because that was going to save a lot of energy, as well as things like Energy Star equipment. What type of plug loads is the owner going to have? Because that's also a pretty strong strategy to save a lot of energy for net zero, to help to get to net zero. The original goal was about 35. The 46 was just the lead baseline. And then during schematic design, I think we're at 29. By the end of design, we got down to 27 BUI, and of course, 0 with the PV. So just similar to what Tom said, you end up, when you reduce all your loads as much as possible, your biggest chunk is usually your interior equipment. And I was excited to get some performance data from Denver Water. Keep in mind, this building was supposed to open a month after COVID. The governor shut down the whole the state of Colorado. So we didn't have a big opening, but we got some around 2021. About 200 people were coming in for a few days a week, and then 2022 and 2023 are more significant, and they're more reflective of normal occupancy, about 600 people coming in a day. And so these numbers are sort of more accurate than these because these were, kind of COVID times. Also, we added the admin was modeled with and without the cup because the cup is in another building. So that load is sort of associated with another building. Technically, it is net zero each year. And then the PV part of it is also degrading 1 to 2% a year. And that's normal and anticipated, but it's something to think about when you're designing for a net zero building. And also one thing that's nice is the blue versus the pink lines are very, very close to each other in the modeling, where the blue is actual and the pink is modeled. The purple is with the cup additional loads from the other building. And then the PV, you can see over time that was pretty right on. And this is actually, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, it was super rainy in the summer. So you can see that effect right there. So what was in this central utility plant? It's pretty sophisticated. Denver Water happens to have a huge water conduit running through underneath the ground. So instead of ground source heat pumps, which are going to be more expensive, we used the heat exchange from the water conduit. And so we're able to do that, plus thermal energy storage tanks to have good heat exchange. And then when those are not enough, we use the air source heat pumps. When those are not enough, depending on the season, we use the chillers or the backup electric boiler for a combined COP plant efficiency for heating and cooling of about 6, which is really good. For example, electric boiler COP is about 1. So then also just wanted to remind y'all, if commissioning and long-term performance and monitoring, MBCX's monitoring-based commissioning is really important, not just for the building, but also for the central utility plant, if that's part of your how you get to your energy performance goals. So all these things that we found in commissioning, and this is our commissioning provider, this is the owner from Denver Water, they all help to save efficiency and to meet those goals. So thank you. And now Tony's going to take it away with One Water.
Yeah. So it would be remiss to talk about Denver Water without talking about water. And one of their key objectives was pushing forward the water story locally. So we settled on a One Water concept for their campus and particularly their admin building. Next. So simply put, One Water is meant to understand all the types of water that affect this campus, and in particular this portion of the campus, including rainwater, building water that's for cooking, because again, the cafeteria is included in here. It's for cooking. There's drinking water, of course, and there's restroom water, but there's also rainwater, stormwater, runoff water. And the idea is to take a look at that holistically and make sure that we're addressing each type, and where we can, providing a fit for purpose outcome, identifying areas that we could minimize our use, or even in the most dramatic case here, target smart reuse. And the plan for One Water, as many of you know, is something that's continued on with Denver Water and the city of Denver, that they investigate on applicable projects that are considering smart water usage. So next slide. So in this case, there's a lot of strategies going on here, but primarily what we're looking at is a series of, again, smart conservation and smart use and reuse strategies. First and foremost, quite simply, it's, our landscaping around the entire site is low water use. And it's targeted to also contain detention up there and water quality. But what we did, in addition to kind of your standard features in terms of controlling water and where it goes on the site, we're also controlling where water goes and how you do it, how you use it on the inside of the building and what lands on our roofs. So a big part of the concept here was use and reuse. So the building captures all of its gray and black water currently, everything from cooking to restroom use to drinking water, as well as capturing the rainwater that falls on the building, the admin building, and the parking garage. Takes it, cleans it where necessary, particularly the gray and black water, stores it in a tank, and then this area here in the green not only doubles as an area of smart low water intensive landscaping, but this is totally irrigated by what comes off of those or what comes out of those sources. Next slide. Oh, back one, sorry. You can see here in the lobby, and we'll see some other pictures of it, that the reuse and recycling system, while it has a number of components scattered across the interior and exterior of the admin building, there is a pretty noticeable finishing wetland that occurs inside the lobby of the admin building. Okay, next, it's part of the polishing stage before the water gets turned over to the cistern that collects it for holding for reuse. To get here was quite the journey, particularly because, as you know, rainwater capture is not something that the city traditionally allows in great volume, and nor does the state understand on-site recycling at this scale. So this really has been a 10-year path, because here in 2024, the system is finally fully turned on and being used. It's finally fully permitted. But we had to change a number of regulations. Denver Water had to go to water court to prove that they could provide water back to the watershed from their own reserves to offset the rainwater. And then we had to affect numerous state regulations and even a few local regulations to understand how to reuse water on the site and prove that it was safe. And then we're running out of time, so I'll be fast. And then just to sort of wrap up here, a couple of slides again of the interior. You can see the polishing wetlands in front of you, and then off to the side on the adjacent slide. And you can see the irresistible stair in the background there. It runs all the way up the backside of the building, and there's windows all the way up that gives you an incredible view when you climb it all the way to the top. All right, I don't know if we have time for questions, but there's another shot of the after state, and then probably a thank you at the end.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you to all of our presenters today. And I also want to give a special thank you to the COTE committee and AIA Colorado as well for all of their support and efforts in helping us plan this. And thank you to all of our presenters for today. I know some of you have to run, but if you are available to hang on for Q&A, I think we can maybe keep this open for a little bit longer if anyone has any questions. But if you have to run, totally understand this middle of the day. Everyone's trying to fit this in over their lunch. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you didn't have a chance to put your first and last name and your AIA number in the chat. Do so before you leave. And then I'll just open the floor for questions if you all have a few minutes to hang around for that. It looks like we have one question in the chat here for Denver Water. Any lessons learned with regards to the wetlands maintenance?
Yes. We actually, and I'm sure they're still learning a few now that it's active, but we did kind of go through a very radical plant change midway through. I know one of the things that we wanted to do also is incorporate as much as we could a little bit more regional and native species and get away from what some of these systems use in other climates, which is more tropical type installations. But we did have to change, we did have to make some plant adjustments, and we did have to worry about, what was going back into the soil, coming out of the system, including it back into the exterior wetlands, because there's an exterior component too, particularly with nitrates and some of the other chemicals.
If you all have any other questions, feel free to, you can unmute yourselves and hop on and ask it live or put it in the chat as well. I think it is interesting with such a dry climate, trying to think about a wetland in Denver. It's fascinating to hear about. Also a COP of 6 for a central plant. I don't know is there anywhere else that has that has achieved that?
There probably are some throughout the country. It's not easy to estimate either. Actually, I have to give credit to Integral Group for doing that modeling of just the central plant for the total combined efficiency of the system.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining. We'll go ahead and close this out. Have a great rest of your day. Hopefully we'll see some of you all at the AIA Design and Honor Awards tomorrow evening. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.